It's with great pleasure I'm introducing Baroness Scotland, our Secretary-General of the Commonwealth. She has been Secretary-General of the Commonwealth since 2016, called to the bar by the Middle Temple in 1977, and to the Dominican bar in 1978. She was made a QC, now KC, in 1991, and a recorder in 2000. She was elevated to the peerage in 1997 and served as a minister in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Lord Chancellor's Department, and Home Office. From 2007 to 2010, she was Attorney General, the first woman to hold the office in its 700-year history. From 2014 to 2019, she was Chancellor of the University of Greenwich. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you, actually, I think for the second time, to address our Commonwealth Conference, residential conference. Last time, I believe we were in Cambridge. And so it's wonderful that you've had time to come back to us. And, you know, we re-emphasize that we are a round table. We all sit on the basis of equality. And although we're sitting opposite to our audience, we encourage a free flow of questions. And I hope you'll be able to answer some questions after your presentation.
Firstly, can I say what a great privilege and pleasure it's been to come back to speak with you. I'm going to apologize straight away because I've just got off a plane from Brunei, so I've had about 17 hours without very much sleep. So I hope you will bear that in mind as I make my comments. Also to say that I was very glad to be able to listen for the last 45 minutes to the last session, because I feel a number of the things and themes that I might refer to will already have been dealt with. But if I can just comment on two things. One, the questions that were made about the practicality of the things that the Commonwealth are focusing on, and just to say that we have been rigorous in looking at the things we can do together which will make a difference. And one of them, one of the things that I'll just add to what Nick said, is in relation to climate change legal toolkit, to answer one of the questions, because we absolutely understand that many of our countries lack the specificity or the acuity of understanding in terms of how you create an ecosystem, a climate ecosystem, legislatively and regulatory, in a way that will make the difference. So our climate change legal toolkit seeks to do that. But if we look at the question that I've been asked, which is really to look at the global challenges and international response and what the role of the Commonwealth is, I think none of us here are in any doubt that our world is under strain. Indeed, that is why I think we're here for this conference, to discuss this. And we gather in the midst of new and decisive shifts in our world. The human damage and the economic dislocation of COVID and the mounting debt that confront us all. And I think you've touched, by the sound of it, on some of that today. But the rapid intensification of climate change poses an existential threat, and the tremors of conflict and instability in our world, the spiraling costs of food and fuel, and the economic uncertainty threaten a serious and protracted crisis. Each of these crises are distinct and can be met. What makes them unprecedented and what makes them so dangerous is their relationship with each other, their amplification of existing social, political, and economic inequalities, and their capacity to combine and to accelerate, because they are global, and their impact on the Commonwealth is inescapable. And we've seen that all through our Commonwealth. But I'll just take one example. Last year, I think Pakistan probably exemplified the true nature of the risk we face. Devastating floods killed nearly 2,000 people. displaced millions, cost billions, and left a third of the country underwater. Across all the regions of our Commonwealth, which reaches right across the world, fertile lands turned to dust, wells ran dry, storms and floods overwhelmed communities, and the ocean continues to rise. Global debt levels are expected to remain elevated at over 94% of GDP from 2022 last year through to 2027, well above the pre-pandemic level of 83.6%. And public debt as a proportion of GDP spiked across Commonwealth to 72% in 2021. That's 13 percentage points higher than in 2019. And driven in part by the conflict in Ukraine, inflation across the Commonwealth has risen on average from 4.1% in 2021 to an estimated 6.6% in 2022. And our small states have experienced larger increases, with inflation doubling from 2.7% in 2021 to 5.4% in 2022. And the Food and Agriculture Organization Fund's price index are at their highest since the series started in 1990, increasing by 7.9% between August 21 and August 2022. And we could be looking at a double-digit inflation before too long. And in some countries, we are already there. We're experiencing it. So rising to these challenges requires a level of international political and economic cooperation which is unprecedented in this century. Yet they are manifest at a time when the multilateral system is under immense pressure. Indeed, they are contributing to that pressure. The world feels as though it is fracturing, and people are anxious about the capacity of governments and international institutions to provide the leadership and the action required. And this in the context of which our story continues. The story of a changing Commonwealth which mourns Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, and welcomes His Majesty King Charles III as its new head, and embraces new members such as Gabon and Togo, who have never before been part of our historic family of nations. And it's right, therefore, and fair that we ask ourselves what the Commonwealth can do to face such challenges, to help make the world safer, fairer, peaceful, prosperous at this moment of great danger. And it's right that I, as Secretary General, offer or attempt to offer an answer. But to fully understand our story, in fact, any story, and its relevance today, we must take the long view. We began as a group of 8 brought together in the shadow of empire after the end of the Second World War and at the beginning of the Cold War to bring a touch of healing to the relationships which were changing. Her late Majesty herself observed that the Commonwealth bears no resemblance to the empires of the past, an entirely new conception built on the highest qualities of the spirit of man, friendship, loyalty, and the desire for freedom and peace, and an equal partnership of nations and races. 1953, equality of races. Something no one else was saying was being said, even then, by our Commonwealth, and I believe she was right. Today, the Commonwealth stands as a voluntary association of 56 independent sovereign states spread across 5 continents and 6 oceans, 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30, and we encompass around a third of the world's population, and we comprise developed and developing economies, island states and landlocked states, some of the largest populations of any country in the world, and some of the smallest, 5 of the fastest growing cities on the planet, and some of the most remote indigenous communities. 33 of our member states are small states, of which 25 are small island developing states. And I think it's very important for us to look at those small states together. 15 of our 56 member states retain constitutional links with the monarchy of the United Kingdom. 36 are republics. 5 have monarchies of their own. Brunei, of course, in which I've just come, being one of them. And the 4 most recent to join us were never part of the British Empire at all. But each is united in active, equal, engaged membership of the modern Commonwealth, bound by the blend of practical advantages, common interests, shared values with which the Commonwealth is really made to be very special and distinct and different. And the rising from all of this is an essential truth. We are the world's largest association of democratic nations and the most significant grouping of countries in the history of the world, which is bound, above all, by values to which we all aspire, the values enshrined in our groundbreaking charter. And the strength of our combination of advantages, interests, and values shines in the fact that with a multilateral system under strain, the Commonwealth, as a multilateral organisation, is growing precisely because of what we stand for and what we can deliver. And we cannot ignore the Commonwealth's history, our story, because our story has its origins in empire and is that of a family at times scarred by old hurts and resentments. But our ability to bring leaders together today as equals, to overcome our history, to have difficult conversations in a constructive spirit, and to face the world's challenges together, underlines our strength and our value. It has, in fact, been a hallmark of the Commonwealth. Throughout our history, we have demonstrated a remarkable ability to confound our own history, and at difficult times to look crisis and evil in the face and call it what it is. You can see it in our collective refusal to turn a blind eye to apartheid. You can see it in our groundbreaking Lusaka Declaration on Racism in 1979. You can see it in the Langkawi Declaration on the Environment in 1989 and the leaders' statement on climate change ahead of the Paris Agreement in 2015. It's really important for us to remember that Langkawi was 3 years before the first COP. And I've got a feeling in this audience, the majority of people may have read Langkawi. And one of the most telling things about that document is tragically everything that was feared in 1989 has in fact come true. And the Commonwealth has always been ahead of the game, pushing, struggling, stressing. And I just want to say that I know the comment was made by our young Commonwealth leader that where did loss and damage come from? It came from, no, it didn't. If you look at Kigali, in Kigali, our leaders came together and basically said enough already. This loss and damage has to now come to the fore. We've been fighting this for 27 years, and the Commonwealth 56, this is the time we push. And they pushed. And if you look, you should have stayed for the last 2 days. If you'd stayed, you would have seen the Commonwealth pushing and saying, we together will make a difference. And once again, they were the difference. And if we have loss and damage today, I believe you will find its genesis in Kigali in June. And that's happened, if you remember, it happened in Malta. In Malta, our countries came together and said we wanted enforceability, we wanted 2 degrees and a 1.5 aspirational target. People forget that they laughed at us. They said, you'll never get 2 degrees. You'll never get agreement. That was November. The Commonwealth went to Paris and we fought. And what did the world decide? 2 degrees, 1.5 aspirational target, and enforceability. So you need to look also at what the world did in September 2015 for the Sustainable Development Goals, because the precursor of the Sustainable Development Goals was our Charter in 2012, imposed in 2013. 1 to 16 of the SDGs is 1 to 16 of our Charter. So we are the roadmap, if we choose to work together. And so you can see it in the Commonwealth Charter, which celebrates its 10th anniversary this year. And you can see it in our continuous, tireless fight for small and vulnerable and the marginalised. We were the first ones who came up with the Small States Initiative. We were the ones who came up with HIPIC. We were the ones who came up with so many of the amazing initiatives. And I'm very glad that Amata is here because, of course, he was at the root of so many of the fights that we had in those days, championing them. So you can see it in our continuous, tireless fight for all of those who are left behind. And these interventions have been groundbreaking and have often, as I've just described, really shifted the dial. So today, in the face of the challenges which are thrust upon us, we must have the courage to break new ground and shift the dial again. The collective resolve of Commonwealth heads of government to do exactly this was there for all to see in Kigali last year, not just in loss and damage, but if you look at that whole communique, it's filled with answers to world problems which other leaders are running away from. And our leaders are facing head on and committed to do something about it. And the credibility of leadership lies in our programme of practical action, support and assistance for our member states, which is more comprehensive today than at any other time in our 74-year history. For the environment, you've heard from Nick already on our Blue Charter and our Living Lands Charter. Both are unique, ambitious, principled, comprehensive, and member-led. And our Climate Finance Access Hub has unlocked nearly 60 million of essential adaptation and mitigation finance for countries which most need it and which might otherwise struggle to access it. And we have about $900 million worth of climate access fund applications in the pipeline. And we hope we will have, now that COVID is over and the Green Fund should, I emphasize, should be operating more quickly, that figure will go up. And in the face of the economic turbulence, debt and inflation, our state-of-the-art debt management system is now in use over 43 countries to help them maximize the benefits of debt relief and generate manageable payment schedules. And our new Meridian system deals with not just public debt, but seeks to manage private debt as well. And our trade and investment advantages continue to be real examples of the benefits of the Commonwealth membership. We may not be a formal trading bloc, but trade costs between Commonwealth countries are 21% lower on average compared to trading with non-Commonwealth members. And the intra-Commonwealth investment has increased by nearly 30% in the last 7 years. And through our Universal Vulnerability Index, we are helping to drive more nuanced, constructive way of defining and measuring vulnerabilities of our nation states based on our, not on outdated metrics, but on hard-headed assessments of each country's real resilience to identify where the greatest needs are. And just to give you an idea, we've got about $768 billion worth of intra-Commonwealth trade now. We think it'll rise to $1 trillion by 2026, and we're hoping for $2 trillion by 2030. And we are pioneering a smart Commonwealth, harnessing innovation and new technologies to help our member states make gains in education, healthcare, employment, and economic activity, environmental management, and access to justice, and so much more. And we're striving towards a new digitalized Commonwealth. And our landmark anti-corruption benchmarks, which were agreed this year and implemented, are starting to be implemented, are actively helping governments and the public sector access laws, procedures, and actions which will bridge the gap in a way that will really help to establish international good practice and make improvements if needed. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the gap between what we have and what we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals is roughly equivalent to what is siphoned off through corruption and criminal activity each year. So every time we narrow that gap, we create a greater opportunity for us to succeed. And our generally accepted principles of performance management, which have been developed through months of painstaking engagement with leaders, thousands of leaders and senior civil servants, are set to proceed through the United Nations towards a global consensus on government performance management. And you'll see in the communique that we agreed, the Commonwealth agreed, those generally accepted principles in Kigali. And these principles might not grab the headlines, but they are the mother of all reform and the foundation of good government. And this is another example of Commonwealth leadership in the world, doing that which no one has yet done before us. And through our Commonwealth Says No More campaign, which I was told today has been recognised by the UN, and we've been given a UN Human Rights Award for it, and our economic empowerment efforts, our work to end violence against women and enable women to participate fully in economic life is reaching more and more people every day. And it's vital, because there can be no true peace and no fair prosperity without women's safety and without women's empowerment. And our work to protect the whole process of good governance and democracy, including our elections, our institutions, and our culture of democracy, as well as our quiet but essential work for peace, serves not just the Commonwealth, but the wider world. And all this work flows from the mandates of our heads of government, and it's rooted in the Commonwealth's greatest strengths, our shared interests, our practical similarities in language, common law, regulatory coherence, business procedures, and large and dynamic diaspora communities. And above all, by our values to which we all aspire. And these values of peace and justice, of tolerance, respect, and solidarity, and our role as the foremost international champion for small and vulnerable states, are an enduring responsibility. They express a vision for the world that will outlast all of us. They make us different. They make us special. And I believe profoundly that taken together, they mean that the Commonwealth today, in 2023, is not simply a part of an international system. It is a beacon within it. It is our responsibility to ensure that we do not simply honour these values, but that we ensure they shape the choices we make in the face of profound global challenges. Because values matter most when they are put to the test. They could be no greater service to the world and to the 1.5 billion people of the Commonwealth who are under the age of 30. 2023 is the Commonwealth Year of Peace and the Commonwealth Year of Youth. And as I said earlier, it is also the 10th anniversary of the signing of our Commonwealth Charter. It is an unique chance for not only to renew our commitment to the values within it, but to bring those values alive in our work. There can be no better opportunity to ensuring that they do not simply represent words on a page, but the lived experience of all. In testing times, we are in a unique position to bring people together, draw strength and inspiration from what we share, ensure no one is left behind, and through the Commonwealth, advance the goal of a more secure, peaceful, fair, prosperous, and sustainable future for everyone, everywhere. And I believe we have never needed our Commonwealth more than we do today. And we can do this if we choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, so much for that very moving presentation, which I think means you were speaking from the heart, which I think we all need. And I think we had Nick talking about moving from pessimism to optimism, and I think what you were saying really illustrates that there are reasons to be pessimistic, but nonetheless we have to move on and become optimistic about what can be achieved. Now, as you saw, there are numerous hands up, and we have about just under 20 minutes. So I will ask all questioners, please, to be brief, one question only. And for the Secretary General's benefit, perhaps, I mean, I may know who you are, but perhaps you might just very briefly introduce yourselves. Owen over there, and we could have the roving mic.
from the Commonwealth Trade Union Group, and you talked a lot, Secretary General, and very movingly about the Commonwealth Charter in its 10th anniversary year. Can I raise with you the issue of Zimbabwe's application to rejoin the Commonwealth? I think probably all of us in the room would want to see Zimbabwe back in the Commonwealth, but not at any cost, and that's certainly the view of our members in Zimbabwe. Given the quite staggering lack of adherence of Zimbabwe to the Commonwealth Charter, to those values that you talked about so movingly, just as a recent example, the Health Services Act in Zimbabwe is allowing the government to criminalise and penalise striking nurses, which is a worrying development that may have wider application beyond Zimbabwe. Can you tell us whether Zimbabwe will be held to adherence to the Commonwealth Charter before it is allowed back into the Commonwealth? And can you say something about that reapplication process? Thank you.
Thank you. Arif, you have this question, and then Bala at the back. Thank you. We'll have 3 questions, and then...
Secretary General, thank you for Arif Zaman. You talked a lot about amplification, or in fact risk amplification, really. So my question is about, and you'll be aware, the Bali Agenda for Resilience that came out of the UN Disaster Risk Conference last year in Bali. A lot of good ideas there about how to move forward on disaster risk. So when parliamentarians, Commonwealth parliamentarians, called for the Geneva UN meeting, it was the disaster risk, they said the Commonwealth has got a lot of potential in harvesting and bringing together its community around that agenda. So would you be open to that idea? Thank you.
Thank you. Bala at the back. We'll just have these 3 questions.
Thank you, Secretary General, for highlighting the pioneering role of Commonwealth in climate action areas. I was at COP27, and crucially on the last 2 days as well. I was a delegate of the Canterbury Climate Action Partnership. I'm a senior research fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. My question is, I was wondering if Commonwealth can take leadership in developing a narrative of hope and achievement on the most important outcome of COP27, establishment of loss and damage fund. And this is going forward. And I'm also interested at the comment that the previous speaker in the previous session, Abir Balla, raised. He was not sure whether India would be a contributor or a beneficiary. So there is a question of, which countries would contribute and which countries would benefit, and the whole narrative is unclear. Would Commonwealth Secretariat take a leadership role in this? And my suggestion is to have a consortium of different parties. And Commonwealth Secretariat already has a previous example of consortium of universities offering youth studies courses involving the Commonwealth of Learning, Commonwealth of Secretariat, and the University of West Indies, which provided the syllabus. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you answer?
I'll go in reverse order. And to say, firstly, that we are extremely committed to this issue of loss and damage. And you'll know that we pushed incredibly hard to make sure that this was a matter that the leaders would have an opportunity to consider at Kigali, because we understood that the empirical data to support it was there, and that we had the arguments. So I can certainly say that having succeeded after 27 years to get it on the agenda, that it's going to remain on the agenda, and we'll be looking at the practical application and what we need to do and how we need to support our member states, who were very vociferous, as you will remember, at that meeting. And it was our small states in particular who made the most powerful arguments for loss and damage. But as a result of Pakistan, for instance, being a big country, it was clear that this was not simply a small states agenda. And so all of those issues are going to be looked at. If we come now to Arif, you'll know that during the time I've been Secretary General, we've created a rapid response mechanism within the Secretariat to look at how we deal with disaster risk. I've just issued it's been quite widely, I think, circulated, an op-ed on what we need to do and the fact that we cannot continue just responding to disasters one by one. We have to look systemically, understanding that these disasters are going to regrettably continue to occur. In the old days, we would say, for instance, for a Category 5 hurricane, that would happen once in a lifetime, once every 72 years. It's now happening every other year. And most people don't know who is going to be hit next. If you look at my country of birth, Dominica, we were hit firstly by Erica in 2015. 95% of our GDP was destroyed. Then 2 years later, we were hit by Maria, which was the biggest then hurricane. It was superseded afterwards by Hurricane Dorian on the Bahamas. But Maria took away 226% of our GDP. So that was within 2 years. So we know that it's going to be much more rapid, and frankly, it's not going to hold water that we just have a response from the international community on an ad hoc basis when we know that this is going to be the new norm. So this is an area which we're looking at. Zimbabwe's application is going to be dealt with in the same way, Owen, as everybody else's application, no differently. And we all know that there is a 4-stage process that we're going through, and we have been very clear and frank with our interlocutors. I can say that my team went to Zimbabwe and had the opportunity to talk to everyone, both the government, the opposition, those who were considered dissidents, and we are taking a very comprehensive view of what is happening. And I am not in a position at the moment to put a report before the members because there's still a lot of questions that we need to have answered.
Thank you so much for those answers. Right, I've got William Horsley, and then Paul Flather, and Karen. I think, try you next time.
William Horsley.
Brief questions, thank you.
Yes, good evening, Secretary General. Can I invite you in this room of friends of the Commonwealth to say something about how you see the value of the good offices of the Secretary General, especially in the face of the kind of democratic backsliding, which was the focus of our first session today, and suppression of civil and political rights increasingly in Commonwealth as well as other countries around the world. Of course, I must acknowledge the importance of the law ministers adopting the set of media principles on media and governance, however, which of course was a civil society initiative which you supported. However, we think that the ministers were asked if they would follow it up with meaningful and practical measures to implement, and that is not happening. And civil society organizations are very conscious that the idea of a human rights commissioner was not possible, that the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group has not been outspoken on these issues of civil society rights, including media. So where is the action plan? Where is the roadmap for that? To get that kind of visible accountability, and what might the role of the good offices of the Secretary General be? Thank you.
Thank you, William. Paul, have you got the microphone? Thank you. As brief as possible.
Secretary General Patricia, thank you so much for filling the glass. We tended to leave it half empty. You've tried to fill it 3/4 or even 4/5. Look, I totally agree. Commonwealth is a beacon. Values matter much. So my question is, how can the Commonwealth confront the dangers from a rising China, which can pick off vulnerable members of the Commonwealth? And as we see, it has caused enormous damage in Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and now possibly Pakistan. And at the same time, how can we engage a democratic India more fully? That India is, I think, the critical member. If India is fully engaged, the Commonwealth can fly. But, you can talk to so many diplomats, politicians, individuals. It's very difficult. And by the way, India is one of 9 Commonwealth members that are democratically backsliding.
And then I had Karen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. We heard this afternoon about the democracy and good governance in decline and backsliding, as Paul said, and 38% of people live under authoritarian regimes, some of which are in the Commonwealth and some of which are disguised as democracies. You mentioned that we have the 10th anniversary of the Commonwealth Charter, we have the 20th anniversary of Commonwealth Latimer House Principles this year as well, and I'm very concerned that some of the Commonwealth fundamental values, including the respect for the separation of powers, judicial independence and the rule of law, is being eroded by governments such as the one in Kiribati, and it seems to us who are working in Commonwealth organisations that are trying to promote these things, that the Commonwealth is backsliding themselves, and this is a real challenge to peace and stability across the Commonwealth. So my question is, what is the Commonwealth Secretariat going to do to reverse this trend and make sure that the governments are held to account for all these issues?
Right, thank you. Thank you, Secretary General. Three rather challenging questions I'm sure you can master.
Firstly, good offices have been rigorously helping in many of the countries. And one of the things I think we should say is that one of the most effective ways of working with countries is to raise issues with them, to help them to change what they're doing in a way that's acceptable to them and sufficiently rigorous to deliver the change, but not so assertively and in a disrespectful manner to make it more likely that they will reject that advice as opposed to accept it. And so, for example, I can think of, in the last 6 years, 16 countries which we've been able to help, who would have been in serious difficulties had they not been willing to work with us. And that's been a very beneficial thing. But if we look at the things that you have rightly raised, the Law Ministers' meeting, of course, only happened, I think, in November. So to say in January we have failed to implement anything is an interesting position to advocate. We are working with our members. We were extremely pleased that the ministers agreed the media principles and were supportive of it, and we got it through unanimously. I think a lot of people might have thought that was less likely than it proved to be, and we were very interested indeed. If you look at all the things that we've done and the way in which we've sought to implement, whether it was the Latimer House principles or others, we've been able to do it very practically to try and make sure on the ground it makes a difference. We are implementing, and this media principles will go from the law ministers to, we hope, the next CHOGM, and then hopefully we'll get an endorsement from the leaders. So we are actively working extremely hard on these issues, and I must say I was delighted that, having supported the idea of the media principles, what now more than four years ago, to see it come to fruition was a matter of great satisfaction to all of those of us who'd worked on it. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank those who did that, because without your help and support it wouldn't be done. Coming to Paul, one of the most important things we think we need to do is to help our member states look at regulatory, legislative implementation. If you think about the work that we're doing on the connectivity agenda, look at the opportunity there is for investment, for the new digital trade, the work that we're doing to get our young people in a position where they get greater opportunities to take advantage of the new digitalized world. So, for example, you would have seen that we had an agreement with Simply Learn, who are offering the Commonwealth now 10,000 training spaces for AI, machine learning, blockchain, because we know that the future is going to be digital. And if we don't give our young people the opportunity to take advantage of that, then they're not going to have a viable future. We've also just done a very good agreement with Intel, who are going to give us 10,000 spaces for our government and other officials also to be trained on AI, machine learning, etc., for the same reasons for policy development. So we're looking at very practical things to say, what do our members need? How do they wish to enhance their opportunities to thrive so that they have better choices? Many people will say that one of the reasons that China was so attractive to those member states is that nobody else was putting out a hand to help. And we are doing everything we can so that people have an opportunity to choose. Karen, absolutely understand that it's the 20th anniversary of the Latin House Principles. We are working very hard with our member states to review the laws, to much more importantly to look at the application and implementation of those laws, what good practice looks like, and those practical applications we hope will really make a difference, and they are making a difference in a number of our member states. But there's more for us to do. Well, you'll know that that issue in relation to Kiribati, as I understand, has now been resolved. Well, it's being resolved. And I think there's one thing we also need to understand is each country in the Commonwealth is a independent sovereign state. So, for example, you'll know that there was great dissonance expressed by how the government in a number of the developed countries responded to various political and other issues, not least in this country. And we have to acknowledge that countries which are democracies commit and do things which we do not always agree and which are challenged. But that does not mean they are not democratic states. And you'll know all the assertions that were made in relation to states in Australia, in the UK and elsewhere. And there isn't, unfortunately, any country in our Commonwealth which is without a stain or without a problem. And so we work on all of them together in a robust and respectful way.
Thank you, Secretary General, very much. And I know there are a lot of disappointed people in the audience, but the Secretary General is very kindly staying on to our reception. But we now do have to wish the Chief a happy birthday of his 90th birthday. So we're going to go down. We're going to just move down, and he's going to come up on the screen in about 1 minute. So thank you, Secretary General, so much for your time. And for those of you who haven't managed to talk to the Secretary General with your questions, please approach her one by one at the reception. Thank you.